Thanks, Carolyn, and hello, everyone. Welcome to the pre-application information session for the FY 2023 Legal Assistance for Victims Grant Programs Expanding Legal Services Initiative, which is also referred to as ELSI or ELSI, as we like to say. The Office on Violence Against Women, also referred to as OVW, is convening this pre-application session to go over the FY 2023 solicitation for ELSI. The purpose of this session is to provide information regarding the ELSI solicitation. We will highlight a few key points in this presentation. However, it is not the intent, nor is there sufficient time to go over every aspect of the solicitation. All applicants are responsible for reading the FY 2023 ELSI solicitation and the OVW solicitation companion guide, and ensuring that a complete application is submitted. Legal Assistance for Victims, or LAV, the program staff cannot provide any feedback to applicants about the quality of an applicant's proposal or provide any information outside of what is presented in the solicitation. However, we will be available throughout the period that the solicitation is open to respond to any questions about application requirements. Please feel free to send questions about the ELSI solicitation to the LAV program email mailbox at ovw.lav@usdoj.gov or call the main line at 202-307-6026. We will also pause periodically throughout this presentation to answer your questions live. It will be helpful to have the ELSI solicitation in front of you for a point of reference during this information session today. You may take a moment now to open it if you have not done so already. Also, we will send these slides to you all after the webinar, so please do not feel that you must remember everything we tell you here. You may use the presentation alongside the solicitation and the companion guide as you prepare your application. Next slide, please. On the cover of the solicitation, please note that final applications are due by 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, March 8th. Please refer to pages 29 and 30 of the solicitation for more information on submission and intermediate deadlines. Please note that OVW will not accept late applications, so applicants are strongly encouraged to begin submitting their applications 48 hours prior to the deadline and to carefully review the OVW policy on late submissions, which can be found on pages 29 and 30 of the solicitation. OVW anticipates notifying all applicants of funding decisions by October 1st, 2023. Next slide, please. Eligibility is mentioned on the cover of the solicitation, as well as on pages 10 and 11. Eligible applicants include private nonprofit entities, publicly funded organizations, provided they are not acting in a governmental capacity, territorial organizations, Indian tribal governments, including Indian tribal consortia, and tribal organizations. Next slide. Though ELSI is new as of FY 2023, page 5 of the solicitation provides background on the history and goals of the LAV program. The LAV grant program is intended to increase the availability of civil and criminal legal assistance needed to effectively aid adults and youth ages 11 and older who are victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. The LAV program provides funds for comprehensive direct legal services to victims in legal matters relating to or arising out of that abuse or violence. Comprehensive legal services should address the broad spectrum of legal issues that victims encounter. In addition to representation in emergency and non-emergency protection order hearings, this includes representation in family matters, including divorce, child custody, or child support, in consumer or housing matters, or in credit restoration. For more information about the LAV program, You can review the LAV solicitation, which is located on the OVW website. Next slide, please. Any services unrelated to the provision of direct legal assistance or legal advocacy are unallowable under the LAV grant program. However, examples of activities beyond direct legal services that may be supported with LAV funds include a few legal services. Please note that LAV grant program funds may not be used to provide criminal defense services. However, funds can be used to provide post-conviction relief to survivors if the matter is relating to or arising from domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or sex trafficking. Next slide, please. ELSI is intended to allow eligible organizations that do not currently offer in-house legal services to establish a program that provides legal representation to victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. To facilitate the development of a legal program, grantee organizations will participate in a planning period that we expect to last approximately 12 to 18 months. During that time, grantees will participate in intensive training and technical assistance, develop supervision and mentoring plans for the attorneys who will eventually work on the project, develop written legal practice policies and protocols, determine whether to begin working with other organizations as formal project partners, and hire an attorney to provide legal services. Upon completion of the planning period, grantees will then obtain final approval from OVW and begin providing legal services. Next slide, please. Funds under this program must be used for the following LAV purpose area: efforts and projects to provide legal assistance for victims of domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and sexual assault by organizations with a demonstrated history of providing direct legal or advocacy services on behalf of these victims. You will find this information on page 6 of the solicitation. Please review this section carefully, as project activities funded through ELSI must fall under this purpose area. Next slide, please. In FY 2023, OVW is interested in supporting the priority areas identified on this slide, and also on page 6 of the solicitation. Applications proposing activities under these priority areas will be given special consideration. Please note that to be considered under the first priority area listed, the lead applicant must be a culturally specific organization, meaning that the organization's primary mission is to provide cultural services to racial and ethnic minority groups. To be considered under the third priority area listed, the lead applicant must be a population-specific organization, meaning that the organization is primarily directed toward providing services to underserved populations. Full definitions of culturally specific and population-specific are included on page 6 of the solicitation. Next slide, please. OVW does not fund activities that jeopardize victim safety, deter or prevent physical or emotional healing for victims, or allow offenders to escape responsibility for their actions. Please refer to the OVW Solicitation Companion Guide for additional details. Also, please note, applications that propose any activities that compromise victim safety and recovery or undermine offender accountability may receive a deduction in points during the review process, or they may be entirely eliminated from consideration. Next slide. LAV and ELSI have specific out-of-scope activities that cannot be supported by this program. We have highlighted some of these activities in this slide, but a couple of examples include supporting law reform initiatives and developing or hosting training at the community or state level. A complete list of out-of-scope and unallowable activities can be found on page 7 of the solicitation, and a complete list of unallowable costs can be found on page 23. It is important to review these lists thoroughly, as applications that propose activities deemed to be substantially out of scope may receive a deduction in points during the review process or may be eliminated from consideration. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to my colleague Simone to tell you a little bit more about the ELSI solicitation.
Thank you so much, Miranda. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. First of all, my name is Simone Bowie. I'm very happy to be with you all here today. And again, I will be covering a lot of information. You don't need to memorize it. You will get a copy of the slide deck and access to the recording, so don't fret. I'm starting first with federal award information, as you can see on the slide. So please follow along on page 8 if you would like to. And as you can see on the slide, all awards are subject to available funds and any modifications required by law. So there is no guarantee that funds will be available in the future. However, OVW may make awards in a future fiscal year for applications submitted under this solicitation, but not selected for FY 2023 funding, depending on the applications and funding availability. The grant award period is 24 months, generally beginning on October 1st of each year. ELSI grantees may be eligible for an additional 36 months of non-competitive funding to continue their projects if OVW has sufficient appropriated funds and the grantee has complied with the fiscal and programmatic requirements of their award. Next slide, please. Award amounts. So ELSI is making awards for up to $400,000 for the first 24-month period, and all awards will be made as grants. And please note that we may award amounts that differ from what applicants request, and that we may negotiate the scope of work and budget with applicants. Next, please. Applicant types. So you may follow along on page 9 of the solicitation for this slide. Because ELSI is a new program, all applicants will be considered new. Note that current LAV grantees are generally not eligible for ELSI. However, applicants that meet the eligibility criteria may be eligible to apply for ELSI if their awards are ending on or before September 30th, 2023, and they do not have a substantial amount of unobligated remaining funds by March 31st, 2023. Also note that project partners of current LAV grantees may be eligible if they do not currently provide in-house legal services and they meet all other eligibility criteria. Finally, please be aware that though you may apply for both ELSI and the regular FY 2023 LAV grant program, you may not receive both. And again, if you didn't catch all of this, no worries. This information is in the solicitation, and you will again have access to our slide deck and this recording. So next slide, please. So right now, I'm just going to pause here so we can answer some of your questions. Miranda and Sandy, it's all yours.
Thanks, Simone. We are going to start reading some of the questions that you all submitted in the chat so we can answer those live. And we're going to start with a question from Deborah. She's asking, are organizations planning to create new direct legal services eligible to apply under FY 2023 LAV solicitation? And they're wanting to clarify what the most appropriate funding stream is for new projects.
So the purpose of ELSI is to allow organizations that wish to create new direct legal services programs in-house. We want to provide the support that you might need and the training and technical assistance to be able to effectively set up those programs. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't be eligible under LAV. You could very well be eligible under LAV so long as you meet all of the requirements to apply under that program. And you would need to determine which of the two solicitations is the most appropriate for your organization.
Thanks, Sandy. This is a related question, but I want to make sure that everybody's clear, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it. If organizations already provide in-house legal services, are they obligated to participate in the planning period as well for LC?
So an organization that already provides in-house legal representation services is not going to be eligible to apply under ELSI, and I would have you look at the LAV solicitation as a more appropriate solicitation for your application.
Great. The next question is from Mark. He asks, can grantees submit a proposal with the intent to subcontract the legal services, either through another nonprofit subgrantee or through private law firms or attorneys?
So for the purposes of ELSI, you would need to have the intention of hiring in-house staff attorneys to provide those services. If you would like to subcontract or have a subgrantee who provides the legal representation, you should look at the LAV solicitation.
And I do believe that question also, or that answer also answers Blanca's next question, which was, can we contract attorneys with case pay as opposed to hourly? And again, just refer to Sandy's last answer. Next, can you speak to the differences between this opportunity and a regular LAV cycle?
Julie, can you provide a little bit more clarity on what you mean by compared to the regular LAV cycle?
Sure. Yeah, I was just wondering, is there a certain type of organization that would be a better fit for one versus the other? What are the eligibility differences? Just how would you decide which one to go for?
So ELSI is only going to be, you will only be eligible for ELSI if you do not currently offer in-house legal representation services and your intent is to develop that type of program in your organization. Any organization that either already has in-house legal representation services or would rather contract or subaward to provide those services should look at the LAV solicitation.
Thank you.
Next, this question reads, our organization currently provides limited legal services related exclusively to immigration. Are we still eligible to apply under ELSI to expand that program to provide comprehensive legal services to victims?
Do you currently provide legal representation services provided by licensed attorneys?
This question was, oh, go ahead.
Hi, yes. So what we currently provide is legal support in immigration applications, but to my understanding, we do not have, we are not able to provide representation services, primarily processing immigration applications.
So if you have a program that has accredited advocates providing services, but does not have licensed attorneys providing services, then ELSI may be a good fit for you. If you have attorneys providing services, I would look at LAV.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question is if we have previously provided legal services through a pilot program, but are not currently providing them, are we still eligible?
Can we come back to that question? I just want to double check the wording of the solicitation before I answer that.
No problem. Ariana, we will come back to that question during the next Q&A period, which will be in about 10 minutes or so. The next question is, can a hired attorney be a part-time attorney for the ELSI granted organization and work other places also?
So the requirement is that you would hire an attorney on staff. Whether that attorney is full-time or part-time would depend on the project and the needs of the community you're serving.
Great. If we have provided immigration services with BIA approved reps, but want to apply for funding for legal services provided by attorneys, can we apply for LC?
Yes, if you do not currently have, if you don't have representation by attorneys as part of the services you provide, you could apply to LC to help establish that type of program.
Great. Okay, next, if our present agency is not BIA certified and we cannot hire an attorney, can we still apply for LC funds to hire a law clerk or paralegal or legal assistant?
So one of the requirements of LC is that during the planning period, you would be required to hire an attorney, and you would have to complete the planning period before you can start providing services under the award.
Perfect. Okay. For the person asking about whether the LAV information session will be available on the website, yes, it will be in the coming 7 to 10 business days or so. Since that session was last week, they just need a little bit of time to get it posted. Then finally, the last question we'll take during this particular Q&A period is one that was posted by Lois, but it looks like she's clarifying a previous question. Lois, can you really quickly identify for us which question you are clarifying from up above? I don't see your name.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, no, I was referring to the person who asked, and I'm forgetting whose name it was, who asked about being, let me see if I can find it. Oh, you've provided immigration services with BIA approved reps. The one to apply for legal services. Oh, it's the one, it's Leia's. Our organization currently provides limited legal services related exclusively to immigration, excuse me. And they wanted to know if they're eligible to apply to expand it for comprehensive. And I believe the answer was you can, right? For this opportunity, because we're in the same boat. We have a partial accreditation for doing citizenship and immigration, helping people with applications, but we can also, I think there's limited representation. It's not the full representation. So anyway, the answer is yes, right?
So the answer is if you have services by BIA accredited reps, not
Yes.
licensed attorneys.
Correct.
And you want to apply to develop a program that would to bring in licensed attorneys to provide
Yes.
this representation. Yes.
Yes,
If you
yes.
already have licensed attorneys on staff providing representation at your organization, LC is not the best fit for you. You should look at LAV.
Correct. And we are looking at applying for both. Mainly actually to be transparent, because there are a lot more funded applications under that proposal. So,
Right.
But we'll take our chances. Thank you.
Thanks, Lois. And with that, we will answer remaining questions during the next Q&A period, but Simone is going to continue talking for now.
There's my unmute button. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Sandy and Miranda and everyone for your excellent questions. So this slide is on the delivery of legal assistance certification. This is a letter that every application must include. The slide is fairly straightforward. So please find additional details on page 12 of the solicitation for further information. Next, please. Application and submission information in the solicitation begins on page 13. If you are following along, which I hope you are. So the complete application package is available on grants.gov or at the OVW website listed on the slide. Applicants wishing to request a paper copy of the application materials should contact us by email or by phone, again, using the contact information on the slide. Again, please review each detail of the solicitation thoroughly, highlight critical information, be very clear on the submission requirements, and note the various deadlines. And note, if you do not submit an application that contains all of the specified elements, this may result in your application not being considered for funding. So please be careful there. And it is your responsibility to ensure that you submit a complete application by the deadline. We will not contact you for missing items. Please refer to the chart on page 35 of the solicitation to ensure that all required steps and deadlines are met. Please submit only documents that are specifically asked for in the solicitation. If you provide information that was not requested, such as additional letters of support from other organizations, this will not increase the likelihood of your organization receiving an award. Next, please. Formatting and technical requirements. This begins on page 13, and this is also fairly straightforward. So please be careful and follow that. You may lose points if you do not adhere to the formatting and technical requirements. Please read the entire list of requirements on starting on page 13 of the solicitation. And you can also see it there on the slide. Next, please. Moving on to application contents. If you're following along on the solicitation, that starts on page 14. Here, there are 2 required documents in this section. Please make sure you include both. First one is the proposal narrative. This section must include the purpose of the application, what will be done, and who will implement the project, right? So that's 3 subsections. The budget detail worksheet and narrative. Here you must include 2 subsections, a budget and a budget narrative. And both of them need to link clearly to the project activities that you've described in your proposal narrative. Your budget should not contain items that are unsupported by your proposal narrative. So note that you will include your budget as an attachment to your application. Please do review the sample budget and webinar on creating a budget. Both of these are available on the OVW website, and we can provide a link in the chat. Applications that do not include both required components will be considered substantially incomplete and will not be considered for funding. Please note, we will not contact applicants for missing documents, so please check your requirements and then check them again. Next, please. Data requested with application. As you can see, this is also fairly straightforward. The data requested with application includes 2 sets of questions. 1, the summary data sheet, and 2, the pre-award risk assessment. You will want to submit each as attachments to your application. These are not scored, but they are both required. And a list of the questions for each of them is listed starting on page 15 of the solicitation. Next slide. Proposal abstract. Although this section is not going to be scored, your application should include an abstract that does not exceed 2 pages, double space. And please don't summarize past accomplishments. And note that the abstract will be entered into a text box in Just Grants. Next slide. Proposal narrative. Circling back now to the proposal narrative I mentioned earlier, and this information starts on page 19 of the solicitation. This section, the proposal narrative, should not exceed 20 pages double spaced, and you'll want to include the 3 required sections, which again is the purpose of application, what will be done, and who will implement the project. Please note that our reviewers will not read more than 20 pages double spaced. So if your application is not double spaced, reviewers will only read the equivalent right? So it's just the equivalent of 20 pages, double spaced, and the remainder of your project will not be read or scored. Again, please do make sure that you respond to every question within each of those sections in the proposal narrative. Next slide, please. Moving on to the budget, as I mentioned previously, your application will require a budget and a budget narrative. You will include your budget as an attachment to your application, and we strongly encourage you to use the spreadsheet program, a spreadsheet program such as Excel or Numbers to complete your budget attachment. Again, you can use, and we do strongly encourage you to use a spreadsheet program such as Excel or Numbers to complete your budget attachment. Your budget must reflect 24 months of project activity. And as indicated there on the slide, you need to include funds to attend OVW sponsored training and technical assistance in the amount of $20,000 for proposals from organizations located within the 48 contiguous states, and $24,000 for organizations located within the territories, Hawaii or Alaska. Please note that this amount is for the entire 24 months and not per year. You may budget for this, you may budget for more than this minimum amount to attend relevant non-OVW sponsored conferences or training. Again, you don't need to memorize everything I just presented. You will have the slide deck and recording as references. Please take note that the budget and the budget narrative should be supporting your proposal narrative activities. They will be reviewed separately from your proposed project narrative or your proposal narrative. And because of this, your budget narrative really does need to include each line item requested in the budget and explain all costs included in the budget, including how the costs of goods and services are determined and how they will fulfill the objectives of your project. So my slide ends here, and next up is my LAB colleague, Maria Flores, who will continue speaking to you about budgets and other financial documents.
Thank you for being with us today. I will be with you for the next couple of slides. For those of you following along with the solicitation, we will be reviewing pages 15 through 18 of that solicitation. We're going to start with the Grants Financial Management Division, which we call it the GFMD. You may hear that referred to as that. So the Grant Financial Management Division, it wants to have applicants keep in mind that we're going to highlight certain aspects of the pre-award risk assessment and provide you with the link to a detailed webinar on how to develop the budget that will be included in your application. First, we'll highlight the items identified in the summary data sheet, which is completed by all applicants in a survey that you'll include as an attachment with your application. A list of questions included in the survey appears at the end of the solicitation under the heading Survey Questions. Specifically, two items that we would like to discuss are the single audit response and the IRS three-step safe harbor procedure. OVW requests that all applicants provide a statement as to whether they have expended $750,000 or more in federal funds during their last fiscal year. However, GFMD is finding that applicants do not always include all of this information. Please ensure that this question is answered in its entirety on the summary data sheet, which is question number 3. Another item that we'd like to highlight from the solicitation is specifically for nonprofit organizations. If you use the IRS three-step safe harbor procedure to determine your executive's compensation, you are required to provide a disclosure letter. Page 19 of the solicitation provides further details. Note that there are 4 required parts of this disclosure letter. Please be sure to provide a response to each of the 4 pieces. The next item that we would like to discuss is the pre-award risk assessment survey. So this assists GFMD during their pre-award risk assessment review for all applicants. Each applicant must prepare a response to all 11 questions, and please take note that each question has multiple parts. We've noticed that the most common issues in prior years, applicants do not always fully answer all parts of the questions, and in turn, this requires GFMD to reach out to the applicant, and that may delay funding decisions. Some of the most common issues that we've encountered have been, for example, question number 2, where the applicant indicates that they do indeed have internal policies, but then they don't provide a brief list of topics covered in the policies and procedures. Another example is on question number 3. Some applicants fail to provide a brief summary of the organization's process for tracking expenditures, and more specifically, whether or not it tracks budgeted versus actual expenditures. So again, these are just few examples, but in general, we want to highlight to please make sure that you read each piece of each question and provide a full and comprehensive response. Next slide. These are resources that we want to highlight that are available as you're creating the budget to be submitted with your application. As you can see, we have the training for OVW applicants and the budget guidance. Over the last couple of years, GFMD has developed a detailed webinar presentation on how to develop a budget to be submitted with OVW applications. The presentation addresses some of the challenges that you may face with your budgets, and it provides some insight on OVW's budget review process. So again, as you see here, you can find the links here. You can write them down, but as Simone was saying earlier, you will get a copy of the presentation, and these links will be provided to you as well. Additionally, the OVW website has also published guidance to help you prepare your budget attachment. So as you can see here, it's a uniform guidance, and that can be found at 2 CFR 200. You can use your favorite search engine to look this up. Another resource that is very helpful would be includes the DOJ financial guide and the LC solicitation itself. And the next slide. We know this can be a lot of information to process. And if you are having questions about the GFMD information that we've discussed, they are happy to help with questions. This is their help desk number. Please feel free to contact them either through the 800 number or through email that you see listed here. Next slide. Some additional required information, and this is found on the solicitation pages 25 through 27. And it provides information about additional documents that will not be scored during the review process, but which should be included with your application. Remember that failure to include any of these may result in your application being removed from consideration. And these are some of the examples of that information. And again, you'll find these on pages 25 through 27. Next slide. The federal civil rights law, found on pages 33 to 34, states that recipients of OVW funds must comply with applicable federal civil rights laws, which, among other things, prohibit recipients from discriminating on the basis of national origin and disability. This includes taking reasonable steps to ensure meaningful access to grantees, programs, and activities for individuals with disabilities, individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing, and individuals with limited English proficiency. Applicants must include funds or other resources in their budget that support activities to ensure access for these individuals. So again, see pages 33 and 34 for more information on these requirements. And with that, I will hand it over to Sandy for questions.
Thanks, Maria. We are going to briefly revisit Ariana's question from the last Q&A period, which, as a reminder, is if we have previously provided legal services through a pilot program but are not currently providing them, are we still eligible?
So you would be eligible, but I do want to remind everyone that the ELSI program is going to have a likely 12 to 18 month planning period to establish the services. If that is something that your organization has already done through the pilot and you would be duplicating efforts, ELSI may not be the best fit for your organization.
Thanks, Sandy. The next question is somebody just wanting a little bit of clarification about whether paralegals can be hired with ELSI funds.
Paralegals can be hired, but you will also have to plan on to hire an attorney.
Great. The next question is, would you mind repeating where the budget and budget narrative should be attached?
When you will attach it in just grants with your application.
The next question is from Leah. It says, I had confirmed with my colleague that while we do have one attorney on staff to support with immigration applications, that attorney does not represent clients in immigration proceedings. Would we be eligible to apply for ELSI?
I think so the requirement of the solicitation is that eligible organizations who do not currently provide in-house legal representation, with the planning period and the fact that your organization already has an attorney on staff that is doing some work, although it's unclear the full scope of the work that that attorney may be doing. You would really want to consider whether an award that is going to require a significant planning period before providing legal representation services is the best fit for your organization.
Great, thanks, Sandy. The next question is, will budgets be submitted as a spreadsheet attachment rather than being directly entered into just grants, or will we need to do both?
All budgets this year will be submitted as attachments. We will not be using the web-based budget form.
Great. Next, someone is asking whether the PowerPoint slides will be shared. Yes, they will be. They will be both posted on the OVW website, and then we will be sending them out as well to all of you who registered. That is. Next, Ariana has a follow-up question. She says, can you describe the activities which would take place during the 12 to 18 month planning period?
Let's see. So that is on. Let's come back to that question at the end of this question session. I need to find the correct page in the solicitation.
Sure. Ariana, as you're just asking the tough questions, but we're happy to get to that one during the next Q&A period as well, which again should be in another 10 to 15 minutes or so. Next, Lois, this is the final question for this particular Q&A period. Lois asked, what is the page limit for the pre-award risk assessment section, and does it count toward the overall page limit?
So the pre-award risk assessment is separate from your project narrative. So it will not count toward the page limit for your project narrative.
Great. Thanks,
I
Sandy.
don't believe there is a page limit for the risk assessment, but I'm double checking the solicitation on that.
Great, that sounds good. And that's a simple enough question that we can go ahead and just post that in the chat when we find the answer. So with that, we are going to end this Q&A period, and I'm going to turn it back over to Maria to finish out her section of the presentation.
All right, thanks, Miranda. So next slide, we are going to discuss how to apply. You may find this funding opportunity on grants.gov by using the CFDA number that is located on grants.gov. I'm sorry, the grants.gov opportunity number or the title of the solicitation, all of which can be found on the cover page. The FY 2023 application submission process, it's a two-step process, and there are significant differences from the process prior to 2 years ago. Application materials will be submitted in grants.gov and in Just Grants. We recommend, therefore, starting the application process, even if it's just the grants.gov part and the Just Grants registration process, as soon as possible, so that this will allow you time to learn the system. Next slide. So continuing on how to apply corresponds with the solicitation pages 28 through 30. Again, and we have stressed this throughout the entire presentation, is to read the solicitation carefully to understand all steps required to submit the application. Also keep in mind the time required to complete each step. Some steps, such as obtaining a unique entity identifier or UEI number, or registering with the System for Award Management, which is also known as SAM, or grants.gov, may take several days to complete. We recommend that applicants begin these processes as soon as possible, but no later than the date suggested in the solicitation. Next slide. Applicants must complete the application for federal assistance, which is referred to as SF-424 in grants.gov. So again, read the information to complete the application for federal assistance section in the solicitation carefully for all requirements. That is found on page 14 of the solicitation. All applicants must complete and submit the disclosure of lobbying activities in grants.gov. And after submitting these two forms, the applicant will receive an email notification to complete the rest of the application in Just Grants. So if the applicant is a new user in Just Grants, the email will include instructions on registering. And that concludes my portion of presenting. I will turn it over to Hannah.
Thanks so much, Maria. My name is Hannah Katz, and I am here to finish you all off, bring you to the last Q&A session. So continuing on Just Grants. Applicants will submit the full application, including attachments, in Just Grants. If you have applied for OVW funding prior to 2 years ago, you will notice some significant changes in the application process. In the Just Grants system, applicants will enter some application information directly into text boxes and upload some documents as attachments. We have included the following major elements of the application as examples of what applicants will submit in Just Grants. The proposal abstract will be entered in a text box. The pre-award risk assessment, the summary data sheet, the proposal narrative, and the budget worksheet and narrative will all be uploaded as attachments. In addition to these major elements, other documentation will be required for all applications or when applicable. Read the solicitation carefully for a full description of all items required. Next slide, please. In Just Grants, each applying entity will have an assigned entity administrator who is responsible for managing entity level information and assigning roles in the system. The entity administrator is also the eBiz POC designated in SAM.gov. For more information on registering with Just Grants, please refer to the website justicegrants.usdoj.gov. Within 24 hours of Just Grants receiving your application from grants.gov, the user submitting the application in grants.gov and the SAM eBiz POC will both receive an email to register for Just Grants accounts. The email will come from DOJ's Secure User Management System, or DIAMD, that is DIAMD, and will include instructions on how to create an account. To ensure that you receive these emails and that they are not flagged as spam, we recommend adding diamond-no reply at usdoj.gov to the trusted sender list in your email settings. Next slide, please. The eBiz POC at the applicant organization serves as the entity administrator and must log into Just Grants to confirm the entity's profile and add users. The user submitting the application in Just Grants serves as the application submitter. Within minutes of completing their Just Grants account registration, both the application submitter and the entity administrator will receive an email from Just Grants with a link to the application that was started in grants.gov. Alternatively, the application submitter can log in to Just Grants and locate the pending application in their work list on the home or landing page. The application number listed on Just Grants will be identical to the 9-digit number that begins with grant on grants.gov. Next slide, please. Each lead applicant must have at least one authorized representative designated on Just Grants. An authorized representative is an individual with documented authority to sign an agreement with the federal government. Before the application is submitted, the entity administrator must log in to Just Grants to review the authorized representatives associated with the organization. If an authorized representative does not have a Just Grants account, the entity administrator will need to invite them to register. Within minutes of being invited to be an authorized representative, the individual will receive an email from diamond-no reply at usdoj.gov with instructions on how to create an account in DOJ's Secure User Management System. Once the authorized representative receives the email and completes the steps to create an account, the authorized representative will be available in Just Grants. Next slide, please. The application submitter will complete the application by entering data into web-based forms and text boxes, uploading attachments, and accepting assurances and certifications. The application submitter will also need to select the authorized representative or representatives. Once all sections are completed, the application submitter will submit the application. The application submitter, entity administrator, and authorized representative will then receive an email from Just Grants confirming successful submission of the application. Next slide, please. The Department of Justice has made a collection of self-guided training resources, including training and a virtual Q&A session on application submission in particular, available at the website displayed on this slide. That is justicegrants.usdoj.gov/training resources/justgrants training/grants management lifecycle. Next slide, please. Final applications are due by 9:00 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, March 8th, 2023. Carefully review the How to Apply and Submission Dates and Time sections on pages 29 and 30 of the solicitation for applicant actions with required deadlines and for OVW's policy on late submissions. Submitting the application components at least 48 hours before each deadline, that is grants.gov or Just Grants as applicable, will enable applicants to receive notice of a failed submission and provide an opportunity to correct the error before the applicable deadline. Next slide, please. Applicants should only submit one application per program. If an applicant submits multiple versions of an application, OVW will review only the most recent version submitted. Next slide, please. OVW offers several options for an applicant to provide advance notice of a delayed application. Applicants should thoroughly familiarize themselves with OVW's policy on late submissions, found on pages 29 through 30 of the solicitation. Extensions are rarely granted. Failure to begin the registration or application submission processes in sufficient time is not an acceptable reason for a late application submission. Next slide, please. Lastly, we have some tips that may improve your chances on becoming an ELSI grant recipient. Please note that the following list is not a guarantee that you will be funded, but rather a guide to navigate you through the OVW application process. First, a few do's. Do read the solicitation in its entirety. It's tempting to just skim through and focus on the How to Apply section, but you'll miss important information this way. Read the entire solicitation carefully and send any questions to the LAV email box. Do keep in mind that the people reviewing your application are not familiar with your organization or your work. Please write your application accordingly. Separately, it is not enough to simply state that your organization will meet the program requirements. When writing your application, do show us how you plan to implement the requirements. As you well know, survivors are not one-dimensional, and neither are their needs. Your application should reflect that. Please do describe how you will address the complex needs of all survivors in your community, including those who may be part of specific cultural or historically underserved groups. Rather than using national data in your application, do take care to find recently collected local data. If that information is not available to you and you choose to use other data, please note that recent local data is not available. Do be sure that your budget can support the goals and objectives in your narrative. Being overly ambitious is not to your benefit. To ensure that your application is feasible, I'll wait until we're back at the right slide. It looks like we got off track here. We're on slide 41. Great, thank you. To ensure that your application is feasible and accurately conveys your organization's capacity, do involve multiple members of your organization when reviewing your application. In particular, be sure that the staff writing the narrative, drafting the budget, and implementing the project all collaborate. Could you please go back one slide? Thank you. Finally, do take note of all deadlines. Recall that the grants.gov deadline is 2 days before the Just Grants deadline. Next slide, please. Thank you. And a few don'ts. Don't include or reference materials, including attachments, that the solicitation does not ask for. Reviewers will not look at any extra materials, meaning that doing too much may negatively impact your score. Don't copy and paste language from the solicitation. Instead, demonstrate your expertise by showing us what you do. We want to read about the great work that you do in your own words. A simple but important tip: don't go over the budget cap. Don't ignore the formatting and technical requirements. These are not just guidelines, they do have an impact on your score. Finally, don't forget to carefully proofread and review your application to ensure accuracy and completeness. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Miranda and Sandy for a final round of Q&A.
Thanks, Hannah. Okay, I see that we don't have a ton of new questions in the chat, so just a reminder to everyone, this will be the final Q&A period, so if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to submit them. I'm also going to backtrack just a little bit to a question that was posed during the previous Q&A session by Ariana. As a reminder, that question was, can you describe the activities which would take place during the 12 to 18-month planning period?
Okay. So in the solicitation, under the mandatory program requirements, which are on pages 9 and 10, you will find number 8 is to complete a planning period prior to providing legal services. The types of activities that would be included would be working with OVW training and technical assistance providers to develop policies and procedures appropriate to the proposed legal department and program. Work with the OVW training and technical assistance providers to develop a supervision and mentoring plan for project attorneys. Revise project goals and objectives if needed and submit them to OVW for review and approval. And determine if the project would be enhanced by the inclusion of project partners, identify if applicable, and if it would, identify those potential project partners for inclusion in the non-competitive, during the non-competitive portion. And the final part of the planning activities is going to be to identify and hire an attorney who will provide legal representation.
Great, thanks, Sandy. Okay, we have another question in the chat which says, is there a suggested budget template or a template for the pre-award risk assessment, or do applicants create these ourselves? As you'll see, Sandy did post the sample budget in the chat, but I wanted to make sure she had a chance to speak to the pre-award risk assessment.
There's not a specific template. You'll just want to make sure that you have a document that addresses all of the questions in the pre-award risk assessment section of the solicitation.
Great. There are currently no other questions in the chat, so we will hang on for a few minutes here. Oh, there's one already. Great. Dana asks, does required coordinator need to be an attorney?
No, it is. The coordinator could be an attorney, but it's not required to be an attorney.
Great. Okay, awesome. I don't see any other questions. Just kidding. There's another one by Dana. Can the supervising attorney also be the coordinator?
Yes.
Great. Okay, we'll hang on for a couple more minutes here to make sure that we're answering any final questions. But for those of you who are ready to drop off of the call, thank you so much for attending. It's always great to get an idea of, who's interested in the grants. It's wonderful to see some interest, and good luck with your application. Okay, we do have one more question. Can the supervising attorney have more than 5 years of experience?
Yes, and generally they would. Any attorney with less than 5 years of experience is required to have a supervising attorney. So the supervising attorney should have more than 5 years experience.
Great. Okay, Vivian, yes, we will be sending the PowerPoint to all of you after it is prepared, which should be in about 14 business days. We have another question from Sally. She asks, can funds be used to support salary of employees working on the planning phase?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the funds can be used to support the staff who will be working to develop the policies and procedures and the supervision and mentoring plan and all of those things that are required.
Great. We have a couple more questions about the supervising attorney. The first one is there a certain cap on the amount paid to the supervising attorney?
We do not have a cap on payment for the supervising attorney.
Great. The next question is, does the supervising attorney need to be full-time?
Whether or not an employee is full-time will vary based on the needs of the project you are establishing.
Great. Okay, the last one in the chat for now is, can funds be used for legal advocates?
Funds can be used to support legal advocates, but do remember that you will be required to hire an attorney to provide representation.
Perfect. Okay, that's the last question for now. Again, feel free to submit additional questions if you have them. But thank you so much for your time. And if we don't have any other questions, then we can go ahead and end the meeting here in a couple of minutes for folks on the Leidos side. And we'll hang out for just a couple minutes here. Okay, I'm actually watching there's another question. Is there a limit or required amount to put in budget for client filing fees and depositions, other related costs as well?
There's not a limit for that, no.
Is there a required amount?
No.
No, great. Okay, the next question is, does the regular attorney to be hired, should their salary be included in the first year or just after the planning period?
That depends on when you plan to hire the attorney. If you plan to hire the attorney early on, for that attorney to be involved in the planning phase, you would include their salary during the earlier part of the award. If you plan on hiring them later in the planning period, you would include their salary for the amount of time you anticipate them being included on the award.
Great. Okay. With that, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. That was the last question in the chat. And just in case anybody else has lingering questions after the presentation, please feel free to contact us at OVW or lav.ovw@usdoj.gov. We will answer your questions via email if necessary. That said, I did see one more question come into the chat just now. Would the following 3 years after the initial 24 months be 200,000 per year, I assume? Or yes, 200,000 per year. Excuse me.
We can't tell you what a budget cap might be in 2 years. Budget caps are things that we look at different times. And so I can't actually give you an answer to that question at this time.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, and I think we are actually officially done this time. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And again, feel free to reach out to us via email if you have any lingering questions in the coming days or weeks. Thank you so much. Good luck on your applications and enjoy the rest of your day.